Hi everyone, welcome to the screencast of the Integumentary system. This screencast will be divided into two parts. The very first part will cover only the first objective, to describe the role of the integument and define general structures. In the second part of the screencast, we'll summarize everything that has to do with skin color and its development. We'll take a look at the accessory organs like hair and sweat glands. We'll take a look also at temperature regulation and how wounds heal. In the last part, we will discuss the different types of skin cancers and some other disorders of the integument. The integument is defined as skin and all of its accessory organs, like nails, glands, and hair. The integument has different functions. One of them is protection, and this is done through chemical means, so having a low pH about 4 to 6, and also physical and mechanical means. So that means that nothing can cross skin as a barrier, or the integument as a barrier. Or hardly anything can, actually. Body temperature regulation is also a function of the skin, so that refers to sweat and the evaporative process that occurs so that you can cool down. And the adipose tissue in the integument also keeps you insulated. The skin has several receptors, cutaneous receptors, that are sensitive to touch, pain, and temperature, and that keeps you safe. And the skin also, the integument rather, produces a precursor of vitamin D, which makes for bones and teeth that are strong. Since the integument has a lot of blood vessels running through it, blood storage is also part of its job, and the excretion of nitrogenous wastes and salt via sweat is the last function that you're going to review here. The integument refers to skin in all its layers. Skin is also known as the cutaneous membrane. It's the largest organ of the body by weight, and it's about 1.5 to 2 meters squared. The integument itself is made of 3 main layers. The epidermis, which is found here, and that's the top layer. It's keratinized, which means it's full of the protein keratin. It's mostly dead, not completely, and it's stratified squamous in histological origin. The middle layer of skin is referred to as dermis, or rather that's the lower layer of skin itself. So epidermis and dermis refers to what you know of as skin. The dermis is mostly connective tissue. The last layer, which is underneath, is also known as the hypodermis, and that's subcutaneous fat. This is not part of the skin, but it is part of the integument. So the integument's made of the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis, and skin is only made of the epidermis and dermis. Here are 3 good places to look at how differently the skin, the thicknesses of the epidermis and dermis vary in different parts of the body. As you note, the shoulder, the scalp, and palms all have different thicknesses of the epidermis. Please note also that the palm has the thickest and is stratified squamous with a couple of sweat glands tossed in there, at least in this slide. So take a moment to notice where the basement membrane is, where the dermis actually starts on each of these. So when you're looking at an actual skin picture underneath a slide, very first thing you want to do is notice where the basement membrane would most likely be, because then you can actually tell where the epidermis is and where the dermis, where the rest of the dermal layer is. Remember, the dermal layer is made of mostly connective tissue, a few glands thrown in there, and right underneath is the adipose tissue that defines the end of the skin and the beginning of the hypodermis. Take a few minutes to pause the video so you can take a look at all of the vocabulary that you're going to have to label eventually on this diagram. Otherwise, I will be going on. First, we begin with the epidermis, the top layer of the skin. Then the dermis, the middle layer of the skin, and these two again make only the skin. Underneath, we find the hypodermis, also known as the subcutaneous tissue, made of adipose tissue. Starting at the hair follicle, I'll be skipping around a little bit. The hair follicle surrounds hair like a little sheath, and it's found only underneath the epidermis, housing the root or the bulb, the hair bulb, which is alive. This is where cells are made, and you'll find melanocytes here too, giving hair its color. The hair shaft pokes out. It's a part of the hair that actually pokes out of the skin. The erector pili muscle is a small muscle that when it contracts, right here, when it contracts gives you what you know as goosebumps, and it's associated with every single hair follicle you have. Sebaceous gland, one sebaceous gland is also associated with producing an excretion that will coat your skin and the hair with oils. Melanocytes are not only the cells that are associated with giving hair its color, but also skin its color. And melanocytes are found very near the basement membrane in the epidermis, so very close to that. Pacinian corpuscles are sensory receptors that are associated with a very, very deep touch. They're found very, very deep as well, just poking out of that hypodermis into the dermal layer. The sebaceous gland we refer to release the fatty oils, and there's a different type of gland. It is not associated with the hair, and that's the sweat gland, which releases the liquids that will eventually evaporate and cool you down. Here's a really clear view of all of these structures again. Take a moment to pause the video if you need. The epidermis, like I mentioned before, is made out of stratified squamous epithelium, which is avascular. New cells are made towards the bottom by the basement membrane, and as they move up, they are full, or they get full of keratin, the waxy protein. This process is called keratinization, or cornification, becoming cornier, harder. And this happens pretty much in all your integument except for your eyeballs. There are 5 layers, and we'll talk about them in a minute. Before we talk about the 5 layers, we need to find out who's hanging in there. So these are the cells of the epidermis. Keratinocytes are the majority, and they produce keratin. Melanocytes produce the pigment melanin, and melanin is used as a way to protect yourself from the sun's rays, specifically UV protection. Langerhans cells are macrophages that hang out in the epidermis. Merkel cells are touch receptors, and they are associated with sensory nerve endings. And stem cells are found at the bottom layer of the epidermis near the basement membrane, and they haven't differentiated themselves to become full of keratin yet. Here are the 5 layers of the epidermis. We'll be starting with the deepest layer, so the stratum basal. This is also known as the stratum germinativum, right here. If you take a second again to look at where the basement membrane occurs, the basement membrane separates the dermis and the epidermis from each other. You can figure out where the stratum basal is. This is the deepest layer of the epidermis, where cells are the most active in mitosis. It rests again on the basement membrane, and this is where melanocytes that give you your skin color are found. These melanocytes produce the pigment melanin. Stratum spinosum is referred to as the spiny layer, and this is the place where cells start making keratin, the protein keratin, and that process right there causes the cells to flatten. You also find a lot of macrophage action. Stratum granulosum, or the granular layer, is a very, very thin layer where cells actually stop dividing, stop undergoing mitosis, and so much keratin is actually being produced that it looks granular in nature, the cells do. Stratum lucidum is found only in thick skin, and this is a place where cells do not have nuclear organelles, and they're getting almost completely full of keratin. Stratum corneum, in several places, like your palms and your body, is where you're going to find the thickest layer, the outermost, dead, scaly, keratin-filled layer. It's water resistant, not waterproof. Here's a nice picture that goes along with all of them, redefining the basement membrane. Stratum basal, spinosum, granulosum, lucidum, again only in thick skin, and corneum. This diagram is a really good diagram that shows you where the dermis begins, and as you go up the epidermal layers, you'll find the different types of cells. For example, the Merkel cells that we discussed were the end of some sensory nerve endings. The melanocytes producing the melanin granules that it will eventually give your skin the color that it has, the Langerhans cells, which are associated with immune responses, the keratinocytes that are producing keratin and filling up the cells, flattening them out as we go up. The dermis is the middle layer of connective tissue, and it is highly vascular, has a lot of blood vessels. It binds the epidermis, the lower part, so the stratum basal, to the lower hypodermis. There is a region called the papillary zone that is found specifically in your fingers and your toes, and this is where extension of the dermis goes straight into the epidermis. This eventually causes the ridges that you know that give you your fingerprints. The deeper layer of the dermis, the one that doesn't stick into the epidermis, right in here, is called the reticular zone, and that's made of irregular, dense connective tissue and lots of collagen and elastin. Most accessory structures like receptors, sweat glands, hair follicles, all that good stuff is hanging out in the reticular zone of the dermis. Lastly, we end the video with the hypodermis, also known as the subcutaneous layer. This is mostly fat, but it is highly vascular. Fat tissue, adipose tissue, is areolar in nature, and it binds skin to deeper layers, including the layers of muscle below. When you think of hypodermic needle, we're talking about needles that go all the way to your subcutaneous, that's what I mean here, subcutaneous layer. And obesity is referred to the accumulation of subcutaneous fat. Layer is normally thicker, about 8% in women as well. So this is where we're going to end part A of the integument system video.